Sheffield United won just 23 points this season, which is the 7th lowest points tally of the Premier League era. Over in the Bundesliga, German giant Schalke fared even worse. The crisis-ridden 5-time German champions, suffering a first relegation since the 1980s with a measly 16 points to their name. Some of you may even recall the plight of Ruda Valenia, the Slovenian Prva side who, in the season before last, went an entire top-flight league campaign without winning a single game. Having conceded a last-minute equaliser in their final game of the season, Valenia ended the campaign with a record of 12 draws and 24 defeats from 36 league games. By almost any measure, these are all utterly disastrous campaigns, filled with despair and disappointment. And yet, there is one team this season to whom a tally of 23, 16, or even only 12 points may seem like a roaring success, since they ended this season without a single point to their name. Those of you who watched my video entitled English Football is on the Verge of Collapse may be well aware of the team that I am talking about, namely Dover Athletic, because, as I mentioned in that video, it was only when I began researching this video about Dover Athletic the first time around that I got lost down the rabbit hole of the struggles, strife, and very real threat of extinction that currently plagues so many English lower league and non-league clubs. That is why I ended up making that more general video about the crisis facing English football 2 or 3 weeks ago instead of this one. But I also said that I may well return to the specific and fascinating case of Dover Athletic before long, and in a desperate attempt to retain my crown of the People's Channel that you first bestowed upon me many years ago, I have stayed true to my word. So settle down, strap in, and join me on a journey to a club that lies just 1 mile away from the famous White Cliffs of Dover, the first site that Julius Caesar had of Britain when he invaded in 55 BC, as we explore the tale of a club and of a chairman that are fighting back against the madness that plagues the lower rungs of the English game, and raging against the non-league machine that is on a one-way track to annihilation. Here in England, the town of Dover is best known for one thing: its port. No, not that type of port. Yeah, that's more like it. The Port of Dover is Europe's busiest international roll-on, roll-off ferry port, handling, in normal times, prior to the pandemic and the UK's withdrawal agreement with the European Union, up to £115 billion worth of goods, which is equivalent to roughly 17% of the UK's total goods trading. Dover's strategic trading importance lies very simply in its geography, located on England's southeast coastline in the narrowest part of the English Channel, just 21 miles from France. For that reason, when most of us see Dover in the news, it tends to be a story relating to business, Brexit, or some row about migrants, rather than the town's not-so-illustrious football club. In fact, Dover Athletic might just hold the crown for the club that has died and been reborn more times than any other in all of European, let alone English football. The town's first club, Dover FC, were founded in 1894, or at least that's when they first became league affiliated, becoming founding members of the Kent League Division 2. Just 7 years later, the club folded, but in 1902 they reformed as an amateur outfit and rejoined the Kent League. After another 7 years, like clockwork, Dover folded yet again. This time, they wouldn't return for more than a decade, re-emerging in 1920 as Dover United, 2 years after the end of the Great War. They folded again in 1933, were refounded again in 1934, and then folded again in 1947, shortly after the end of the Second World War. They wasted no time making a comeback this time around though, rejoining the Kent League as a semi-professional outfit later on in 1947. Dover won the Kent League title in the 1950s, followed by the Southern League title in the 1960s, enjoying their longest period of sustained existence since their foundation, before folding yet again under the weight of crippling debts in 1983, and immediately being reborn in their current guise under the name of Dover Athletic. All in all, the club has crashed more times than Caitlyn Jenner on her way to the shops, and they have had more rebirths than a travelling biblical scene reenactment group. Apologies for the lack of images of Dover Athletic at certain times in this video, by the way. Getty images are chronically lacking in that department, so I'll just have to get creative. In 1990, Dover Athletic won the Southern League title, but they were denied promotion to the conference as their stadium was deemed to be not up to league standards. 3 years later, they won the Southern League title again, and this time they were granted promotion to the conference, the highest level of non-league football in England, now known as the National League. By 2002, following 8 years in the 5th tier of English football, Dover were drowning in debt once again. They were relegated from the conference and entered a CVA, offsetting their debts against any future profits, with the club owing an estimated £400,000. By 2005, Dover had no profits to be able to repay those debts, and the club was on the verge of extinction yet again. Former director Jim Parmenter led a consortium which stepped in to save the club, and Parmenter became Dover's new chairman. Parmenter runs a fruit and veg import business based in Canterbury and has a current estimated net worth of £15.8 million, according to Company Check. He was also previously a director of fellow non-league side Margate. Following more than a century of financial difficulties and destruction, Parmenter promised change at Dover Athletic, promising to keep the club 100% debt-free, thus securing their future. It is very difficult to go bankrupt without any debt, though I suppose if anyone could do it, it would be Dover. Parmenter didn't make any bold claims about trophies, big money signings, or reaching the Football League, just promising a solid, stable community club that the people of Dover could support and that would still be around for their children to support in the next generation. It was a noble mission statement on the face of it, of the kind that is all too rare in a sport full of showmen and publicists looking to make a name for themselves and willing to bet their house on red to do so, and to hell with the consequences. Parmenter stayed true to his word, reportedly injecting £4 million of his own money into the club across his 15 years of ownership. Not only did Parmenter oversee Dover's longest period of financial stability, he has also overseen the club's most successful era on the pitch as well. Dover have never reached the Football League, not in their current guise and not in any of their many former carnations. The closest they have come to reaching the league came in the 2015-16 season though, when the club finished 5th in the National League ahead of the likes of Lincoln City and Tranmere Rovers, qualifying for the playoffs, where Dover lost 2-1 on aggregate to Forest Green Rovers in the playoff semi-finals. Had they won promotion, Parmenter would have tasted 4 promotions in the space of 11 seasons. But 3 isn't bad going, with no relegations to his name. The following season, Dover made headlines due to the extraordinary goal-scoring feats of their journeyman non-league centre-forward Ricky Miller, who bagged 45 goals in just 46 games, earning himself an ultimately unsuccessful move to League One side Peterborough United. So everything was going pretty well for Parmenter and Dover, by non-league standards, up until the COVID-19 pandemic hit in the first few months of 2020. Balancing the books in the non-league game is tough enough as it is, let alone with a global pandemic decimating your largest income stream. In March 2020, the National League season was suspended, and in April, the league's clubs, including Dover, voted to end the season. Dover finished the season in 11th place, bang in the middle of the National League table, on a points per game basis. Parmenter placed all of his staff on furlough to alleviate the financial burden of the club operating without any income, and praised what he called the fantastic help being offered by the government. Ahead of the 2020-21 season just gone though, Dover had to bring their players back onto full-time contracts as they returned to training ahead of the belated campaign kicking off. However, in September 2020, with COVID cases on the rise again, the government announced that they would be pausing the reintroduction of fans at games on October 1st, just 2 days before the National League campaign was set to begin. And by now, Parmenter was criticising the government for their lack of communication with clubs. Parmenter fought against the season beginning behind closed doors, arguing that Dover simply could not afford to operate without fans, and they weren't alone. It costs around £80,000 a month to run the club, with most of the team's players at the time earning between £600 to £900 a week. Last year, all of Dover's players were made available on free transfers after reportedly turning down a 20% pay cut. Dover did have around £100,000 cash in the bank at the start of the season, but most of that money was from season ticket sales, which would have to either be partially or fully refunded if fans weren't allowed back into the ground, meaning for Parmenter that if he were to spend that cash, it would likely effectively later function as a form of debt owed by the club to their supporters, which the club wouldn't be able to afford to pay back. Parmenter claims to have personally put £700,000 into Dover in the last 2 seasons alone. In the end, the league's teams reached a compromise, believing that the government had offered the league grant funding in order to keep clubs afloat until fans were able to return. However, going into 2021 and still with no sign of supporters returning, it was revealed that from December onwards, the funding would begin to come in the form of government loans rather than grants, meaning that the money would have to be repaid. This caused a major uproar among the 66 National League, National League North, and National League South clubs, not least at Dover Athletic, leading to an ongoing dispute between the numerous National League clubs, the league, and the government. Parmenter stated, "I feel very let down by the authorities, by the league, and by the government because we would never have started this season if we hadn't been promised funding. I feel let down that the money has not been forthcoming. We should never have started this season." End quote. National League teams maintain that the government broke their promise and have requested the minutes from their key meetings with the government in which the grant funding was discussed. The government, and specifically the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, led by Conservative MP Oliver Dowden, haven't provided them, reportedly claiming no minutes were kept. A claim that Yeovil Town Chairman Scott Priestnall describes as strange, given that it was a meeting in which the government agreed to hand over £10 million to the clubs present. The DCMS deny ever promising the clubs ongoing funding in the form of a grant, claiming that it would be unfair on other sports and other businesses, and describing their loan scheme as having very low interest rates and as being repayable on lengthy repayment terms of up to 20 years. However attractive the government may deem their loan scheme to be, most National League teams feel that they have been conned, and Parmenter's no debt rule means that Dover Athletic turned down the government loans, not wanting to threaten the future of the club by taking on debt for the first time in his 15+ years of ownership. With little to no income coming into the club and outgoings of £80,000 a month, Parmenter decided to take drastic action. Player and staff wages, and associated costs, account for around 85% of Dover's total operating expenses. So, his solution was to slash those costs. All but 4 first-team players were furloughed, and the 4 that remained went from full-time to part-time contracts, as Dover transitioned from being a professional to a semi-professional club, a status they will retain until something material at the club changes. No players, or just 4 players, meant no football, and Dover played their final game of the season on January 30th, losing 3-1 away at Yeovil Town. Parmenter had argued in favour of the 2020-21 season being cancelled, just like the previous campaign, when the club had been able to furlough their players and staff without failing to fulfil any fixtures, stating, "We play football for our fans and our community, and in their absence, I can see no logic in burdening the club with hundreds of thousands of pounds of debt to complete a meaningless season." End quote. Whilst other teams have taken on increasing amounts of debt, thus increasing their chances of becoming insolvent and ceasing to exist, Parmenter has refused. When confronted with the threat of relegation, the club's mantra seems to be that any league is better than no league, though they weren't about to take any punishment whilst lying down. Whilst National League North and National League South chairmen voted to null and void their seasons, meaning there would be no promotion or relegation, the National League chose to go on in a split vote, meaning that teams could still win promotion to the Football League, but that they couldn't be relegated to either the National League North or the National League South. Dover may have been given a temporary reprieve from relegation, but they wouldn't go unpunished. Towards the back end of March, a National League panel fined the club £40,000, issued them with a 12-point deduction, which will come into effect at the start of the 2021-22 season, and expunged all of their results from this season up to January, when they stopped playing, hence why Dover have 0 points this season. Dover are refusing to pay their £40,000 fine, which they claim will bankrupt the club and force them to fold. Something that they believe the National League knows, which would make sense given that the reason they stopped playing was because they had no money, so to fine them for not playing, well, you can see how that could become a pretty vicious circle. Other National League North and South teams have been hit with similar fines for similar offences, which they intend to contest, initially by appeal, but also through the courts if required. One alternative for Dover would have been to still furlough all of their staff, but to fulfil their remaining fixtures using youth team players. But the club's highest youth team age group is the under-19s, and Parmenter wasn't prepared to send them out like lambs to the slaughter in the top flight of non-league football. As far as Parmenter and Dover are concerned, they were given assurances from the league and from the government that weren't fulfilled, meaning they do not deserve to be punished for refusing to take on large amounts of debt, which would effectively mean gambling the future of the club. From the outside looking in, there was no obvious solution for the club, or for any National League clubs, except for the handful who have very wealthy backers and are therefore more insulated from these kinds of issues. It would be easy for me to paint this as a club fighting back, a heroic chairman standing up to a broken system, and a reason for optimism. But it isn't that simple, and I'm sorry to say, I don't see too many reasons to be cheerful. There are no winners at Dover Athletic, or at the many other clubs in a similar predicament. For the club, they have lost their status of professionalism, and 15 years of financial stability is under grave threat. Even if they successfully appeal against their £40,000 fine, it seems highly unlikely they'll be able to wriggle their way out of their 12-point deduction, meaning that they will begin next season with a mountain to climb. In fact, they would have a mountain to climb under normal circumstances, but with only 4 players still contracted to the club, what they face is really more akin to trying to reach the summit of K2 unassisted whilst carrying a grand piano on your back. They are unsurprisingly heavy favourites to be relegated from the National League next season. For the players, or former players in most cases, it is absolute devastation. Like so many people, they now find themselves out of work through no fault of their own. And these are not millionaire footballers who will be jetting off to Dubai or the Maldives this summer whilst their agent finds them their next club. For the 4 retained players, as mentioned, they are no longer full-time professionals, and will likely have to seek out another form of part-time employment to sustain themselves. For the 15 released players, they now have no income. Many of these players have families and mortgages that need paying. As with the club, their outgoings haven't stopped, but there is nothing coming in. Having been out of action for so long, not even training for most of that time, and with so many clubs at that level also in dire straits, they are finding it incredibly difficult to find new clubs. Most have only ever known football, and were expecting to spend the next 5, 10, even 15 years in the sport. But now, they are having to retrain, and are either considering or have already made the decision to quit football altogether. It is a lesson that all footballers, and all athletes, ought to learn a trade or try to gain some kind of formal educational qualification should the worst happen. But it's also a damning indictment of the English game. Dover Athletics manager Andy Hessenthaler spent his early career playing part-time in the non-league game whilst working as a builder. It wasn't until he turned 21 that he was first even paid to play football, signing a contract worth £40 a week at non-league Dartford. Only when Hessenthaler was aged 26 and attracted the attention of second division side Watford did he get his first taste of league football. He went on to play more than 200 games for Watford, followed by more than 300 games for Gillingham, where he was voted as the club's greatest player of all time. And he even won promotion with my beloved Hull City under Peter Taylor as a slightly unusual 39-year-old loanee in 2005. Hessenthaler didn't retire from football until the age of 45, spending his last 3 seasons as player-manager at Dover before returning to the club in a solely managerial role in 2018. Why am I banging on about this? Well, because it is quite possible that there is another Andy Hessenthaler at Dover Athletic right now, maybe even an Ian Wright, Jared Bowen, or Jamie Vardy lurking in there somewhere. But if they are forced to quit football, at least in any competitive sense, due to their precarious employment situation, they are gems that may never be unearthed. In that sense, the situation at Dover Athletic is bad for supporters of Dover Athletic, it is bad for their players, and it is bad for English football as a whole. Following my cliche-ridden introduction, I was going to end this video by making a tenuous, absurd, and somewhat amusing link between Jim Parmenter and Julius Caesar, Caesar having orchestrated the downfall of the Roman Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire, and Parmenter pioneering the end of a wretched non-league system and crumbling house of cards that exists basically outside of the top 2 tiers of English football, and the rise of a new breed of sustainable non-league clubs. But I don't honestly believe that that is the case. Perhaps a more accurate analogy would be a tale, fictional on this occasion, which is just as synonymous with Dover's White Cliffs. In Shakespeare's King Lear, there is a scene in which the Earl of Gloucester's own son, Edgar, disguised as a mad beggar named Poor Tom at this stage, leads his father to Dover's Cliffs, where Gloucester intends to throw himself off the edge and commit suicide since he can no longer bear his suffering. Blinded by this stage in the play, Edgar tells Gloucester to jump when he is not yet at the edge of the cliff, before telling him that he has miraculously survived the enormous fall and that the gods must therefore not want him to die yet. It is a scene so tragic that many viewers find it amusing, taking it beyond the realms of a classical tragedy. Gloucester's tale, and the tale of King Lear more broadly, is one of madness, comedy, catastrophe, cruelty, stupidity, misplaced trust, underqualified fools in high office, and death. And for those of you who have watched both my video on English football being on the verge of collapse and this one, you will know that perhaps there is no finer metaphor for the English non-league game than the tale of King Lear. Dover Athletic, unlike Gloucester, are refusing to jump off the cliff edge. But for their insubordination, the National League and various authorities have decided to push them instead. As flies to wanton boys are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport. Well, quite. That's it for today's video, a comprehensive analysis of the current situation at Dover Athletic, and the most pretentious ending to a HITC Sevens video yet. Tune in next week, when I'll be quoting Goethe or Michel de Montaigne in a video about Kidderminster Harriers for absolutely no reason at all. In all seriousness, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Dover Athletic are a club with roughly 1,000 fans, which means that even if this video absolutely crashes and burns, it will still likely be seen by a much larger audience than any game Dover have ever played in. And this isn't just a story about Dover, as I have hopefully properly conveyed, it is a much bigger problem than that. Thank you all as ever for watching, hit the like button if you enjoyed today's video, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on for HITC Sevens. You can also check out, there are a couple of videos on screen now. One of them is that How English Football is on the Verge of Collapse documentary, and the other is just a documentary that I made about Zaire at the World Cup, just because I think that's a good video, so I thought I'd put that there for you. You can also find me on social media, on Twitter or Instagram by the username @HITC Sevens, should you wish to do so.